This episode is brought to you by TerraSlate. What if the paper you use every day could survive a hurricane? What if you could print it through any laser printer and write on it with a basic ballpoint pen and it would still be waterproof? Let me introduce you to TerraSlate waterproof paper, used and trusted by the NFL, the U.S. military, and Michelin-starred restaurants to survive in the harshest conditions. It prints through any standard laser printer and never rips, peels, frays, or smudges. If your notes, maps, menus, or fieldwork matter, use TerraSlate waterproof paper and you'll never laminate again. Visit TerraSlate.com and order a sample pack today. Welcome to the Love in Action podcast. I'm your host, executive coach, speaker, and author, Marcel Schwantes. I believe that when we show up with our full humanity to work and lead from a place of love, joy, purpose, care, and inclusion, it's going to make a radical difference in your leadership, your business, and your bottom line. This is a show about actionable, practical love, the verb, as a leadership and business strategy. Let's get rolling. Hey gang, welcome back. I am myself back. I took my family on vacation since my 12-year-old was on his fall break from school. And we visited Savannah, Georgia for the first time, and we loved it. If you ever need a vacation spot in the south part of the U.S. with lots of history, cobblestone streets and like moss-covered oaks, hanging over your head, and walking through the historic district with like 200-year-old mansions in architecture that you will not see anywhere in the country. I'm telling you, amazing food on top of that, maybe ghost tours, and a beach on an island not too far off if you have kids. I'm telling you, this should be your next vacation, Savannah, Georgia. No, I'm not pimping Savannah, Georgia. I'm not. Nobody's paying me to pimp Savannah, Georgia. We just had a great time. So check it out if you have a chance. Anyway, today's show is going to be interesting, and I think that the topic that we're going to talk about today is an important one in this day and age that we're in. We're going to talk about masculinity, and I'm bringing in a very distinguished guest and expert on that topic, Ed Frauenheim, and I will introduce Ed in a minute. So this conventional notion of what it means to be a man, what Ed and his co-author, Ed Adams, call confined masculinity, they say it traps men in an emotional straitjacket, steers them towards selfishness, misogyny, and violence, and severely limits their possibilities. Wow. Okay, right off the bat, boom. That's a lot of you listening are men, and I appreciate that. So some of this stuff may hit you kind of dead on. All right, so let's be open and welcoming to some of the things you're going to hear. Okay, so as an antidote, the authors propose a different paradigm, and we're going to talk about what that paradigm is, okay? And so they have lots of stories, and they have done lots of interviews, collected the data and the research, and you can find all of that in a fascinating book that they co-wrote called Reinventing Masculinity. There it is, if you're watching on YouTube. Reinventing Masculinity, the liberating power of compassion and connection. And that book was actually released in 2020. So by the time this episode is over, it is my hope that whether you're male or female listening to the show today, but especially if you're male, that you're going to discover a masculine way of being that is going to drastically improve your relationships, your well-being, how you see the world, and maybe even lead to your success. So, Ed Frauenheim is known as a soulful storyteller. He is a writer, speaker, and consultant who has focused on workplace, technology, and culture matters for more than 25 years. His stories have been featured in USA Today, Harvard Business Review, and Fortune. Ed spent quite a few years as director of content at Great Place to Work. That's the global consultancy that puts out the annual Fortune 100 Best Companies to Work For list. Ed also co-founded the Teal Team, which is a research and advisory firm that studies and advocates for more conscious organizations. He lives in San Francisco, and he is the father of 2 adult children and husband to artist and educator Rowena Ritchie. Ed Frauenheim finally joins us. Such a pleasure to have you on. Welcome to the Love in Action podcast.
Thank you so much, Marcel. That was a very wonderful characterization of the work I'm doing, and I'm looking forward to diving into the conversation with you.
Me too. So we start like this. You ready?
Ready.
What's your story?
I struggled with being a man for much of my life, Marcel. Grew up skinny, not very strong, and very sensitive. In a world where in the 1980s, I'm 58 years old, what was valued was being muscular, very confident with the ladies, for example, and a winning athlete. I choked in some key games. I was an athlete, but I also was not a great athlete or an athlete you can count on, because I often got really nervous in these key moments. And so this sense of not being successful as a guy haunted me for much of my year. This continued into my college and work years. And on the surface, I looked great. I went to Princeton University and Berkeley. I was writing articles for prominent organizations, co-wrote some books, but there was definitely this nagging sense that I was not a real man, you might say. And that led me in, partly with looking at work and how work was changing, to reflect on this, what we ultimately called confined masculinity, where men were really told to be stoic, self-made, and at some point self-sacrificing if they became fathers, say, and kind of give away too much of themselves. And so I co-wrote this book with Ed Adams, because as we know, Marcel, 2 Eds are better than 1. I had to find another Ed. So Ed Adams is a psychologist who brought a lot of the psychology to it. I brought a lot of the workplace culture research on leadership, and how leadership was becoming a territory where you needed more of these archetypical feminine qualities like emotional intelligence and collaboration and communication. So he wrote the book. And then the last part of my story is I had to take my own medicine, Marcel. Literally. I had a mild heart attack in 2021. And I listened to the pain I was experiencing and the sudden fatigue and the chest tightness. Went into the hospital, even though many men do not take signs of a heart attack seriously. They don't get help, and it often leads them to die. So I did get into the hospital. Thankfully, it was a mild heart attack. Doctors were able to open up a cramped artery that probably had to do with anxiety and stress that I've wrestled with for my whole life. And I've been taking a medicine to try to prevent that ever since. And then, as we were talking earlier, Marcel, I had another health scare crop up this year. I have been diagnosed with a stage 4 appendix cancer. And it sounds scary, but it's treatable. And the stage 4 I have is not as bad as you might think, because there is spread of my cancer, but only in my belly. And I, again, attribute my willingness to take pain seriously. I was experiencing all this lower abdomen pain in about March timeframe. And I looked up on Google what this could mean. And it's like, if it's appendicitis, you got to go to the hospital, because there's a 50% chance you could die if your appendix breaks and you don't get help. Well, the scans that came out of that showed that I had this appendix cancer, but it's in a pretty early, it hasn't spread very far. Mm-hmm. But if you can get down up to a gradient of 39, and I'm an 11 in terms of how much it's spread in my belly. So there's good odds I'm going to survive this. It's by taking my medicine about how to break out of those confined ideas of manhood. And I feel more successful as a man, as a person, than I ever have, Marcel, in large part by challenging those received notions of what a guy is supposed to be.
Whew. Wow. Okay. So I'm thinking, it's amazing to me that you mentioned you had to take a dose of your own medicine. I mean, the book came before your ailments. And so it actually forced you to realize, okay, this is no longer just, here's what I advise to get men out of this, maybe a toxic masculinity to come out. And now you're faced with it. So it's kind of like you're writing your own story as you go,
Yeah.
based on, okay, well, here's the book. Now I got to apply the principles.
Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, you mentioned, well, let's talk about the terms that you use, right? I
Okay.
mean, the title is Reinventing Masculinity, and then you talk about confined. You already mentioned it, confined masculinity. So let's bring out the definitions. What exactly do you mean by confined masculinity?
We mean the set of beliefs and expectations that define how we can be as men, and especially in terms of roles we're sanctioned to play. Excuse me. And some of these, I might be hiccuping at times to your audience, Marcel, because of these medicines I'm on for the
Yeah,
cancer.
we'll keep it real.
So
That's,
apologies.
we'll keep it real.
Um, those I kind of hinted at them before, but we're supposed to be like emotionally stoic. We're
Yeah.
not supposed to express our feelings. Boys don't cry. We're supposed to be self-made. We're supposed to be able to achieve, rise to the top of the hill, be powerful. Wealthy, powerful, famous is a sign of our self-worth, and we can be ultimately self-sacrificing, where we are the breadwinner of our family, a provider, protector, and procreator. We have kids, and in those roles, we can easily lose sight of our own soul, what our
Mm.
soul is calling us to do, what our dreams are, because we're giving it all away for our spouse, our children. And so though that's a pretty cramped way of being a guy that has turned out to be unhealthy. The research shows that the guys that have a strict adherence to that rule tend to have poor outcomes in life.
Yeah.
Worse relationships with their kids and their loved ones. They end up doing a lot of risky behaviors and unhealthy behaviors, and it really leads to often a life that's shortened by health issues.
Mm.
Like I mentioned, I learned as I did the research into heart attacks that men often don't take signs of a heart attack seriously because
Mm.
we're supposed to be tough. And then when they do have heart attacks, men often feel like a sense of shattered masculinity. This is a term that some researchers in Canada came up with, because your heart is your center, right? And it's like we're supposed to have big hearts as men, and it's a source of courage. But when men have had a heart attack, they suddenly feel like that's kind of cracked, and they don't feel as confident as parents, as employees, as spouses. And then they're depressed or anxious, and they don't get help with mental health, because that's stigmatized for men as unnecessary help from others, because we're supposed to be self-made in
Yeah.
islands. So those are some of the things that confined masculinity lead to on the personal level. And you mentioned in your summary, there's also wider impacts. This growth of strongman leaders that actually wasn't so much of a deal when we wrote the book, but on a global scale, this notion that hard, tough, manly men need to rule the world is a danger to democracy. It's a danger to science-based notions of the climate. It's a danger to global wars that we've seen, like Vladimir Putin running. So there is and also in organizations, if you don't have leaders who are male leaders that are leaning into some more of these non-traditional ways of operating as a man, those teams and those organizations are generally going to suffer in today's climate.
Hang tight, gang. We'll be right back. This episode is made possible by today's sponsor, TerraSlate. Ever lost a critical handwritten note or a printed document to rain, mud, or time itself? Hate using non-recyclable laminating sheets? TerraSlate waterproof paper is built to fix all that permanently. It's waterproof, rip-proof, and virtually indestructible. TerraSlate is recyclable, easy to print on with any laser printer, and can be written on with a basic ballpoint pen. The company's focus on sustainability is evident to its core. The company is powered by 100% renewable energy and was recently named a Denver Broncos Small Business Partner. From ocean dives to mountain summit. TerraSlate is trusted by the NFL, the U.S. military, and Michelin-starred restaurants to perform when nothing else does. If firefighters, engineers, students, and creatives trust TerraSlate in the toughest conditions, you can trust it to protect your work too. Switch to TerraSlate and you will never laminate again. Visit TerraSlate.com and make your ideas indestructible with waterproof paper. Yeah. And yet here you described a lot of the things that I have seen throughout generations, throughout the decade, maybe even throughout history, when you talk about, that kind of masculinity that's all about take the hill, conquer your enemy, kill, whatever. It's indicative of just look at your history books. Go back in time to the earliest wars. It seems like it was dictated by the kind of confined masculinity that you just described. So I guess that begs the question. I mean, how did we get here? Why are we still stuck in this mindset of?
It's a great question, Marcel. And one of the cool things that came out of writing that book is that we got a wonderful foreword by a scholar on compassion, and his discussion of where we got here really, took me down a new rabbit hole of looking into what have we been like as men for our whole human existence? Because the history you mentioned is basically written history from like 3000 BC on, right? And then there's a whole 100,000 years of human existence, where we don't know exactly what men were thinking and women were thinking because we don't have words. So we have to piece together the archaeology of it. And Paul Gilbert, who is the scholar, put me onto a couple of books that showed that we were often very different in our relationships and our roles as men going back to the hunter-gatherer tribes, early civilizations. There was a lot more creativity and fluidity in these roles. For one thing that apparently that some hunter-gatherer tribes did was, if men were really good at hunting and brought back the biggest mammoth, say, they would be kind of subtly teased about it. So like, oh, that's all you got today, Sven? It was an attempt there were multiple subtle attempts to prevent any one guy from thinking they were better than other people. It limited that sense of domination and I am the best. And there were many other examples of this where you're giving away wealth, you're expected to share what you do, and it really was about taking a village, So, and this is even in some cities going back in history where there was. It looks like it doesn't look like grand things are happening, like Alexander the Great conquering vast swaths of Asia and Europe, but people on the ground were living with like village councils where they were sharing power and living in peace. So I think we often assume this is the only way to be a man, and it's not true. And then if we, just to throw in then on the history part, we've always had men that were showing a different way, from the Buddha, Jesus, Mohandas Gandhi. There's primary examples, and also most of the faith traditions celebrate this less toxic kind of man, or an integration of the masculine and the feminine.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought it up, because that to me is what I see in the evidence now for organizational scholarship, literature, is that those that should be rising to the top and in leadership roles and leading organizations are the ones that you said have the integration of both sort of the masculine, healthy masculine, as well as the feminine side of leadership. But when you combine those two together, it makes for a great leader. And that's unfortunately not the case today, because we are not rewarding people with that combination that you just described into the upper echelons of leadership. We still look at things like charisma and confidence, which turns out to be overconfidence that leads to narcissism, as those that rise to the surface. We don't have to even go further than politics, because you see that in most positions of power, people lead that way, right? In through this very hyper masculine approach, and still in corporations as well. So I wanted to find out.
Well, can I just
Yeah,
with you
jump
on
in.
that? I love that, Marcel. And I think you do a talk on servant leadership,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And so these ideas of alternative leadership have been around for a while, right? That was from the 70s, I think, Greenleaf. And I have had the privilege of working with some of the best companies to work for. Like, as you said, it was a great place to work when we studied their employee sentiment. We interviewed their leaders. So I want to add to what you're saying. Yes, we don't nearly do this enough to reward the more holistic leaders, but there are a lot of pockets and places where these kind of more balanced individuals, whether they're man or woman, are bringing together the what I would call archetypical female and male, the yin and the yang, if you want to use the Asian term for this, the assertiveness, the drive, the sense of purpose that's more masculine, and the sort of receptivity, the listening, the connection that is more the yin side of things, or the archetypal female. And those organizations are often quietly doing really well. And just if you'd like a story or two, I can share one, but we can also go to other places. But I just wanted to give that hopeful caveat along the way.
Yeah, I thought maybe we could go into sort of the antidote to confined masculinity, since we've kind of already, we've defined what that means, right? Confined masculinity is what holds back leaders, especially male leaders, when they lead through these top-down approaches of controlling leaders, power-hungry leaders, right? Or those that want to take the hill, and and so there's the flip side of that. So what's the antidote?
We call it liberating masculinity, Marcel, and it really means freeing men to widen their scope of possibility. So it's not like throwing away all these noble qualities of drive and achievement, if you want, and protecting and providing, but it's adding other options. So now you can collaborate besides compete. You can be emotionally expressive besides sometimes sucking it up and enduring a challenge. You can express compassion for yourself as a starting point, because we often are not very kind to ourselves as men, and share it with others, and not just in a kind of doing action way, but speaking and recognizing and communication. And we see ourselves as connected, not just these islands, these self-made islands that are self-sacrificing. We are interdependent with our families, with our world. And that's just the truth. You're going to need help when you're a baby, when you're sick, when you're going to, at the end of your life. And there's all these ways in which our public infrastructure allows you to go do your thing that we often don't see. But we now are, as men, can see these things. We can strengthen relationships. We can realize how powerful it is to have a friend, good friends. And that is what the research shows. You know, you're probably familiar with the Harvard study of men for a long period of time. The main way you have a healthy, happy life is through your relationships. So it's just scientific as a guy.
Yeah.
To embody this liberating masculinity.
And you kind of just touched on what you guys called, you and Ed Adams called the 5 C's, right? Which is the sort of the framework for liberating masculinity. So I want to bounce back and forth between the 5, just to give some context to our listeners. And maybe I'll start with compassion, because that's still a very misunderstood term. How does compassion play a role in liberating your masculinity?
It plays a key role in part by being kinder to ourselves. And this is something that I learned in the writing of the book that Ed Adams brought to me from the psychological realm. But there's a really wonderful scholar called Kristen Neff, named Kristen Neff. Are you familiar with her work?
Yes.
All right. Have she been on one of your podcasts?
Not yet. She's on the list.
She's amazing. And she talks about self-compassion involving like 3 keys. First is you have to feel that you're hurting, which is something that alone can be hard for us guys, right? To even acknowledge that there's pain in our bodies or in our soul and our psyche. then you have to do something to be alleviating it. That can be as easy as like putting your hands on your chest and saying, this hurts, or doing something like something nice for yourself, going on a walk on the beach or something like that, or sharing with a friend what's going on with you. And then the third thing is also key, because this is where a lot of men, I think, get tripped up. You have to recognize that it is human to suffer, that it's a way of connecting with everyone else, because then you avoid going into self-pity and you are in self-compassion. Self-pity leads to a lot of problems where you kind of lash out at other people. It's all this is only happening to me. I'm a victim. You still might be a victim of something, but with the part where you say this is part of the human experience, it allows you to soften and I think it could help you be more compassionate to others as well.
Yeah, and I'm going to even go a little further. This is, to me, indicative of a lot of men. I'm going to put myself in that bucket, okay? And that's we are often very harsh or very critical of ourselves, of our work. When we don't meet our expectations, we begin to feel like we're inadequate, right? Like we're failing, and yet we're going to fail, and it's all part of life. And I know that I have felt inadequate, and what happened in the past before I began to sort of come out and get in touch with my own heart is I would isolate. Mm-hmm. And as soon as I isolate and try to figure things out on my own and get in my own head, things would get worse, because I would spiral into anger. I would be resenting myself, maybe even resenting other people. Unjustly. And how I came out of these spirals is through a lot of self-awareness work, self-acceptance, and self-compassion, the things that you're talking about. I learned to be kind to myself, basically. I don't know if you have anything to add to that. I mean, yeah, do you have a story because I think this is so important for men who are so critical of themselves, that they might be destroying their own well-being.
One story I'll share is that my co-author Ed has been leading a men's group for 30 years. Now it's 35, called Men Mentoring Men. And they have one rule in their group, which is that no man shames another. So you are able to speak your truth without feeling judged. And there's a sign, I think, on the door of the meeting room that said, "No man beats himself up lightly." To your point, when we get critical of ourselves, we're so critical typically, and I think that goes back to those roots of some of the ways we've been taught to be men. That our self-worth is about achievement. It's not necessarily about like the divinity of our soul. Like that even though that our faith religions tell us that, we don't listen to that as much. And we're like, we got to be the best, we got to achieve, and also got to hold in our emotions. So when we feel like we're not good, and the piece about not expressing it just makes it worse. It like spirals us, as you put it well, Marcel. In my own case, I will say I had a really weird, rough patch when I was a journalist at a CNETnews.com. We were covering technology in Silicon Valley here in San Francisco. And I kept doubting my own ability to write a good news story, to the point where I was like going to my editors after something was published and saying, I think there's a small error in there. And sometimes they were errors, but other times they were just like, no, it's not really an error. It's a judgment call, and you're being insane, more or less. So it can really mess us up when we are not. I was self-sabotage myself basically as a journalist when I didn't need to, and it was coming out of this sense of I think beating myself up and not being more compassionate, and even accurate about how I was performing.
Yeah. Another one of your 5 C's is connection. So I want to touch on that, because this is where we get into the warm and fuzzy for men, right? And it's like, hey, I mean, Ed, I am as manly as the next guy, right? I'm a sports buff. I
Yeah.
I consider myself masculine, but I have finally learned to be kind of integrate all my parts and be in touch with myself, my emotions. And when it comes to connecting, I have found that men need other men, but we are afraid of the word intimacy. Is it possible to be intimate with other men in a camaraderie, sort of like, in a community sense?
It totally is, Marcel. And it is hidden. As you're right. I mean, there's so much stigma associated with homosexuality that we're told that's like the worst thing you can be as a man, right? It's like the opposite of manliness. And thankfully, there's been a lot of education, more tolerance, compassion built over time. But even today, people struggle with being in community. And I watched my own father in his later years miss that. He was too embarrassed to connect with old friends because he wasn't in a financially sound state. He let that pressure to be a successful self-made man prevent him from having these loving relationships. And so, yes, there is a kind of way that men can be loving each other. I think you use the word agape love in some of your writing too. Like, that is a Greek sense of a more platonic, caring, listening, community kind of love. And guys are doing it. They're meeting in many, many kinds of men's groups around the country. Some of them have just started. Some have been around for a long time. There's one called Men Walking and Talking, I think. And guys in LA and New York are just getting together. It's a shoulder to shoulder kind of thing, like at a sports game. So you're not forced to face the guy across the table from you, which can get a little awkward, but it's a chance to connect. And I see this in places where you might not expect it too. Like, I've been doing a men's group in the ski industry. And that is called the Total Guy Group, because it came out of workshops that I told you about earlier, where a guy in the ski industry mentioned that two men on his team had killed themselves and nobody knew that they were hurting. And he got really upset, and he said, "We think we have to be so tough in this industry. Well, fuck the tough guy show." And so I went up to him after we weren't even talking about masculinity issues. We were talking about leadership issues, Marcel. And we started a series of talks that have continued to this day in the ski industry, like 4 or 5 years now, around how do we get past the tough guy show. Yes, you have to be tough sometimes, but you can't pretend you're tough all the time. You need to be tender also, a total guy. And so these guys, they rave about this little once a month meeting we get together on Zoom, because like it's one place they aren't judged is one thing they say. And we talk about losing family members or loved ones. We talk about dealing with leadership, and we talk about dogs. It's a lot of different territories. And so, to the answer to your question is, in a short, put it simply, is yes, we can do it, and it's happening. And there are ways for guys to get involved, and we could share some resources later on that.
Yeah, you bring me right back to the balance again, the integration of the best parts of leadership, right? The masculine and the feminine side. Do you know who Gary Ridge is?
The WD-40 guy?
Yeah. Well,
he's been one of the pioneers in this, right?
Yeah, he says the best leadership approach is to be tough-minded, which speaks to, you want to deal with the hard stuff and be results-oriented and be a driver, but you balance that with being tender-hearted, which is the compassionate and the empathetic side, which we need to address in today's workplace, so that we are leveling the playing field and bringing up more leaders who exhibit those two sides to lead the ranks of organizations and companies, and that's what's missing at the top right now. Yeah. Okay, I want to throw in another one of your 5 C's is men are going to appreciate this because it's courage, but most masculine men would say, "Well, hey, I'm brave. Yeah, I mean, I don't fear anything. I put me in the front of the battlefield. I'll go out there and I'll take charge." Right? That's how we see courage. Right? Courage in in the sense of overcoming obstacles and taking charge, etc. But you have expanded the definition of courage in the context of healthy masculinity. Talk a little bit about courage.
You summed up the conventional notion of courage really well. And we're saying yes to all that. That is noble, to go running into the burning building to try to save a child, say, or to take a financial risk. There's sort of physical and financial courage. Yes, keep it going, guys. But there are other territories where we haven't often been as courageous. And I'll start with the emotional realm. Are you willing to share when you're hurting with your spouse or your best friend, excuse me, or when you are feeling deep love for them, or care, and especially that's hard with sharing that with guy friends. Like, you are so meaningful to me. You get me through my hard parts. I love you, man. You could have a bro hug, shoulder hugs, and we've gotten some good movies over the last couple decades where that happens. So yes, and going and being open to the hurts that others express to you, which is it can be hard. Mm-hmm. Hear your kid talk about feeling bullied or struggling in some fashion, and just want to solve it right away, which is also possible, but to be emotionally available to them, to mirror back to them, I hear that it's just really stinky right now. And that we know that mirroring, that sense of feeling empathy is so important. And the other realm of courage, I'll say, is self-awareness, because it's easy for us to ignore, and we don't think we're interconnected. We can easily think we've done it all on our own and ignore the benefits, the advantages we've had as guys. Excuse me. I'm so sorry about the hiccups. And audience members, like, this is what chemo cancer is like.
Yeah.
Steroid that makes me hiccup. It's easy to ignore the ways we have benefited from, especially for white guys, like systems where we were not experiencing bias. We know that the research shows that we have a leg up. We're born on first base or second base typically, and we think we hit a double. And it's not like we haven't worked hard. You typically still have to work hard, but we also have had some advantages. And so this is one of the key things also in that workplace culture thing. And I think this administration currently is trying to ignore all that and say, no, guys, don't feel bad. You deserved everything. And it's a parody. Like, the people that are running the country right now are not the most meritocratic choices. So, it's almost like a joke. But I would say that it's hard for us men to be courageous about looking in the mirror, seeing ways that maybe we have had a leg up, and then just help others.
Yeah.
From a position of privilege, essentially.
I love this other C, which is, oh my goodness, so important to this equation, and that's curiosity. I just feel like we aren't curious enough. We're not asking enough questions. We are not being more intentional to understand those who differ from us, from our viewpoints, our beliefs, etc. So talk a little bit about how curiosity fits in to a healthy masculinity.
Yep. We all are curious as children, right? Marcel, men and boys and girls, any gender, if they're defining themselves that way at a young age. And we wonder, why is the sky blue? What makes airplanes stay up in the sky? How does this tree grow? And for guys especially, we get that curiosity smushed out of us little by little. So that by the time we're teenagers and in college even, you're supposed to be the smartest guy in the room. And to ask a question implies you're not the smartest guy in the room because you don't know something. And so we get this message over time, and in many corporate cultures where you want to be the man or the person who has got it all figured out. And it's just we're living in a business world that's faster, flatter, more fairness focused, and more fully human. Maybe we could unpack those if we want, but the faster part, especially, and flatter, is like, things are going quicker than ever in terms of innovation, in terms of disruption. And the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, puts it so well. We need to go from being know-it-alls to learn-it-alls.
Mm-hmm.
The guys that embrace this curiosity, that rekindle their curiosity, they're the ones that are going to thrive right now, not the ones that are like arrogant and claiming they know shit and or not asking the question when they don't know.
Yeah.
And they have a chance to learn.
Yeah. Well,
does that drive with what you see is in your leadership work?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Satya Nadella of Microsoft, who is such a prime example of the kind of leadership we're talking about. Which brings me to this question: besides him, in your book, do you have any examples of maybe a high profile person that may like be exhibiting this kind of soulful, if you will, manhood?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this. I wanted to mention him earlier. Cisco's CEO, and forgive me if I don't know if he's still there, but he was there for a number of years, and when it was a great place to work. But it's Chuck Robbins is the guy I'm thinking of, CEO of Cisco, the giant telecom and IT firm. He came to power, and he immediately started showing these kinds of advanced leadership, if you will, liberating masculinity leadership. For example, and soulful leadership, because one of the things that happened early on was he had a dream of visiting a homeless encampment in his Silicon Valley town of San Jose, California. And in the dream, he saw the face of his pastor and his father. And the next morning he woke up and he's like, I got to do something about this. And he called a local nonprofit, the mayor, he talked to the mayor, I think, initially of San Jose, and then started working and ultimately led Cisco to contribute like a $50 million gift of a new transitional housing unit. And he told his colleagues what was going on, and he was wanting to inspire other Cisco teammates to do that, and it did happen. All this, like a wave of greater employee philanthropy surfaced and accelerated. And what other CEO is going to acknowledge that a dream inspired a big initiative of this? And this did not happen to the exclusion of business results, Marcel. You would probably recognize this. But a lot of people think that's the soft stuff, nothing to do with shareholder value. But Chuck also introduced a new line of subscription IT gear, networking gear. That was the fastest growing selling product. And the stock rose to a high level. And this is partly because his team was behind him. Like, look at this inspiring leader we have who's like, taking our role as corporate citizens seriously. So he's an example in the book that I just love sharing.
That's great. And I just checked in real time to see if he's still the CEO of Cisco, and he is. So he's been at the helm since about 2000.
How would you get rid of this guy?
All right. I want to get practical for a minute. Okay. So if you were to assign me homework, because I may fall into those tendencies where I need to re-liberate my masculinity, because maybe we fall back into those trappings of confined manhood, right? So give me some homework. Like, help me practice healthy masculinity. What's one specific practical thing I can do right now?
Okay, this is a great question. I'm going to weave in the last two C's. The last C, which is commitment. So how do you stick with this journey? Because it's hard. You're going to get setbacks. You're probably going to be accused of being a wuss or worse if you start practicing these things by a lot of guys and also women who expect us to be in a traditional camp, So to keep it going, one piece of homework is to continue that self-reflection. Can you jot down in a journal how things are going with this attempt to liberate who you are as a guy, maybe once a week, and write down these little assessments, if you will. We've got an assessment in the book that can help you kind of place yourself on this continuum. And then to be a little, maybe a stretch goal for you, Marcel, and others is to join a men's group. Men Walking and Talking, I'm just looking at their website. There's a group called Men Living. They have all these virtual groups. It's just guys getting together to talk. You don't have to, you don't have to bare your soul immediately to these guys or anything like that. But it's powerful to be in the company of guys that are trying to live in healthier ways and show up in more whole ways, more soulful ways. Sometimes these can be church groups. Those are also can be promising. So those are two things I would say. be committed and do some kind of regular self-reflection. Join a men's group. And a third one I'll say that wasn't in the 5 C's as a C I've added is contemplation. Have a meditation practice or a prayer practice. Those can be so powerful to reminding us of our best selves and the men we want to be.
Yeah, yeah. Well, shoot, there's that voice that's just like tugging at me, going, "No, you need to bring this up." So I'm gonna go ahead and do it, and I'll fit it in right here. I want to bring females into the conversation, but under the same context that we're talking about. I spoke with Dr. Tomas Chamorro Premuzic, who's an organizational psychologist, well known, and he said that this is what's happening: is we have been. I mentioned this earlier. We have been rewarding the wrong behaviors and traits in leaders, who then rise up the ranks through things like charisma and confidence, which then becomes overconfident. They become overconfident, and then narcissistic traits start to show up. And what's happening, he said, is that it's forcing women who are trying to move up the ranks in leadership roles to also acquire these traits, because this is what's being rewarded as leaders flow to the top and into executive roles. Women are realizing, well, shoot, now they're stepping out of their natural sort of design and taking on these hyper or toxic masculinity traits just so that they can move up the ranks. And so what Dr. Tomas said, it's basically we're getting both men and women with the wrong traits moving up the ranks, where they're not bringing the equal balance of drive and results with emotional intelligence and humility. And so women are being taken out of their natural the natural way that they should lead.
Yes, and that is a terrible phenomenon. And I see hope there too, Marcel, because again, I've been exposed to the high road companies, the Fortune 100 best, and I can tell you that Tomas is not wrong, and I love his scholarship. And there are a lot of places where you do see better qualities rewarded. And more. I mean, I suspect. And just to give you a quick example, I used to work as a consultant for a company called Credit Acceptance, which is an auto finance company. And I worked closely with 2 of their leaders, the CEO, Ken Booth, and their head of HR, Wendy Rumler. Wendy came out of a finance background, a crazy, high-achieving athlete, and was three sport person, volleyball, I think, maybe basketball, and another one. Her motto for a long time was like, loser, second place is first loser. I mean, she's super competitive. She experienced panic attacks during the pandemic and had always poo-pooed people that had mental health problems. But the stress was too high. Her mother was in trouble physically. The company's culture was challenged by this new challenge of the pandemic. But she decided to share. She told Ken about it, and then eventually she told her entire company about having panic attacks and saying we need to do a better job of caring for our employees holistically. And she was actually warned by some of the sales team. No one wants to hear that, But she said, "I'm freaking doing it," and it unleashed a torrent of people coming up to her after saying, "I'm so glad you said that. I'm going through this." Or someone I know is going through this. My kid is going through this. So that is a female leader who is leaning into that more holistic, emotionally intelligent, and toughness balance.
Yeah, that's great. Well, as we wind down here, Ed, is there any topic? This is sort of your chance to kind of like tell me what you wish I had asked or what you wish we had talked about. Maybe that's the last moment of, all right, let's get it in here. So,
yeah, I'll throw one thing in. We men are typically afraid that other men are going to make fun of us if we reach out with some of this new stuff, this emotional intelligence, if we don't show up as sexist. There's actually research that men expect other men to be more sexist than they really are. And I have a piece coming out in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution later this month that I co-wrote with Brandon Smith, a wonderful psychologist and executive coach in the Atlanta area. And we talk about both of us were surprised by how much support we got from our male friends when we talked about suffering, either emotionally or physically. And so we can have a little faith in our fellow man, literally, Marcel.
Yeah, yeah. All right, Ed, we're going to transition to our speed round. Strap on your seatbelt. I'm going to fire questions. You fire them right back. Here we go. One of the greatest lessons you've learned in life.
That winning isn't everything.
Mm.
That's part of this masculinity thing, but I definitely worried about that for a long time. Come to learn it.
Something that you have changed your mind about, whether it's a belief or a value, etc.
I have come to believe there is a much greater presence of the divine all around us.
Ooh. I love it. Favorite memory as a child?
I'm going to say sitting with my mom on her bed and cuddling with her.
Yeah.
There's a little vulnerable admission.
Yeah, I miss my mom too. She passed right before COVID. Thank God that it was before COVID, because we all got to hold her hand and say goodbye without being on the other side of the glass, right? or not even entering the building. So yeah, I miss my mom. Name a person, dead or alive, you would like to have dinner with.
Mohandas Gandhi, and to understand his principles of peaceful resistance, nonviolence.
Bungee jumping or skydiving?
Skydiving.
All right.
More appealing to me.
Your biggest hope for humanity moving forward?
That we can get pretty quickly to a generation that doesn't experience trauma as kids.
Ooh.
So that leads to so many other problems.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good, Ed. All right. Well, you've survived the speed round. That was kind of quick and painless, right?
It's great. Fun.
All right, let's wrap up this episode with two questions we always ask our guests. The first one is the leading with love question, hence the title of our podcast, right? How do I lead with actionable, practical love and care day in and day out?
I love your question here, Marcel, and I love the podcast title. And one thing that we say in the book at some point is that liberating masculinity really allows a man to truly love in all these different meanings. And I think we put the word curiosity as our first C. We talked about it in different orders today. But one of the things that I think we don't do enough of is just ask questions and listen to those around us. Mm-hmm. And especially as leaders, like start by learning and listening to how people are doing.
Yeah. I'm learning a lot about that myself. All right, bring us home, Ed. What's that one thing you want people to take away from this conversation?
We have such fuller lives available to us as men. So much more joy, so much more health, so much more soulfulness. We really feel a deep, sense of satisfaction in our lives.
Yeah. Gentlemen listening, get this book. Again, it's called Reinventing Masculinity, The Liberating Power of Compassion and Connection. You can get it wherever books are sold. And ladies, if you want to get it for your husbands and you feel they need to read this book, absolutely. I highly recommend it. Ed, finally, if people want to connect with you, find out more about you, where can they go?
Look me up on LinkedIn. I have a weird handle there, so not super easy to remember. And the other thing that I have is a Substack that's called Frauentimes at substack.com or frauentimes.substack.com. And I'm doing a lot of chronicling of my cancer journey and seeing a lot of it through the lens of these masculinity matters. So yeah. I'm having fun doing that, even though it's challenging at times. But I'd love folks to have a look at that if you're curious.
Yeah. And Ed, let me just say, I so appreciate the fact that you came on the show with knowing that you're in the middle of your ninth chemotherapy session, right? And you're dealing with probably the pain and these weird side effects, the hiccuping, et cetera. And you could have easily said, Marcel, I can't take this on right now. But here you are. You showed up. in all your humanity, in all your courage. I mean, you have demonstrated the kind of masculinity that we've been talking about. And we so appreciate you for your wisdom and the work that you're doing. And we're honored for it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcel. That means a lot.
Gang, keep the conversation going on social media with hashtag Love in Action Podcast, and look for my show notes and a YouTube link if you want to watch us banter back and forth. All of that can be found on my website, marcelschwantes.com. For Ed Frauenheim and yours truly, remember, in the end, love always wins. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Love in Action Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it, subscribe, and leave us a review. Until next time, don't forget, the future of leadership is love in action. Believe it, practice it, and watch your leadership and business flourish.